بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين. صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فسقى لهما ثم تولى إلى الظل فقال رب إني لما أنزلت إلي من خير فقير. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Throughout the Holy Quran, we are told the stories of the prophets of God. And the prophet that is mentioned most by name, individually by name, more than any other prophet, is the prophet Musa alayhi salam. And what's interesting about the stories of the prophets is that the Quran tells us of their victories and their achievements, but likewise it tells us of their struggles and the challenges that they faced. Because part of the victory is appreciation of the struggle. So in the story of Musa, for instance, one part of his struggle is the verse that I just read. That after he defended one of his followers, he struck a man down and he hit him so hard that he took his life. He had to leave and he found himself as a fugitive, as a refugee. And for days he wandered in the wilderness with no provisions, with no food, until he came to a watering hole and he found a number of people there, among them 2 young women who could not get to the watering hole, so he made space for them. And then the Quran says after he made space for them, he went and sat under the shade of a tree. And when he did so, he said, Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khayrin faqir. Oh Allah, anything that you send to me, anything good that you send my way, I am faqir, meaning that I am in need. He had basically hit rock bottom after days without food, without provision. And that's when the blessings began to come his way. When he found himself in a state of faqr, when he found himself in a state of need. And in that moment, psychologically and emotionally, Musa was struggling. Likewise, there are stories that describe our own Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In his own struggle. So one story has it that during the early days of revelation, the Prophet would receive revelation on a continual basis, and then one day the revelation did not arrive for about 3 consecutive days. And the Prophet began to think to himself, where is this revelation that was once common and that was once frequent? And so after the revelation continues, after it resumes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds the Prophet that even though sometimes you may feel alone, that we have never left you. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. Were you not in a state of poverty and God brought wealth to you? Were you not an orphan and we found people to shelter you? Were you not lonely and we found people to support you? So God was telling the Prophet that despite what you're feeling, despite the struggles that you're going through, we've always had your back. Now, some narrations push that even further. there is a narration in Sahih Bukhari that says that, and it's narrated from one of the wives of the Prophet, and she says that she describes the Prophet when he first began to receive the revelation, that according to her description, that the Prophet thought of himself and imagined himself as possessed. He was possessed. Now, there's two things at hand here. Number one is the idea of possession, tajneen, and conflating that, meaning confusing that with mental and emotional illnesses and mental and emotional struggles that people face on a regular basis. According to one writer, he says that in more, and the term that he chooses is a bit harsh. He says in more primitive societies, but what he means is in less informed and less educated societies, sometimes illness is induced upon people because someone else suggests it to them. And some people, they're experts in this. They will make you believe that you feel a certain way. And think about it, if someone sees you and says, you look a little bit off, are you okay? Most people, because we feel a little bit different on a daily basis, we'll say, yeah, you know what? Now that you mention it, I haven't been getting enough sleep, or I haven't been really feeling well, or my back has been hurting, or my head has been hurting. And the point that he was trying to make is that some people, they're experts at this. They're able to suggest to you that you are feeling ill. So, in that same way, there are people that can suggest that you are possessed or that you're affected by an outside force that you have no control over in some societies. That's one issue. And another issue, when it comes to the idea of mental and emotional struggles as it is attributed to the prophets in the Holy Quran, is the idea that if we are struggling today, if we're struggling in this world, that means that somehow we are not worthy. We are less worthy individuals. So if I'm going through a bout of, let's say, depression or anxiety or some more serious mental illnesses, such as bipolar or schizophrenia, that in some way, because I'm struggling from those conditions and those illnesses, that I'm not worthy of God's love, that God is angry with me, that God is punishing me. So those are two concepts at hand, and I want to address both of them. In terms of the first, which is the idea of mental health and mental struggles and emotional struggles that are mentioned in the Quran. The Quran teaches us the following. The Quran describes the human persona with three dimensions. The first dimension is known as an-nafsul mutma'inna. And this is mentioned in the verse in the Quran, Ya ayyatuha an-nafsul mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. And what Islamic psychologists have said is that this dimension, this part of the persona, this first dimension of the persona, it represents our spiritual dimension. And it represents self-actualization and self-esteem. So self-actualization and self-esteem, if you're familiar with, in psychology, the theory of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So towards the top of that are the needs of self-esteem and self-actualization. This is one dimension. The second dimension that the Quran mentions is an-nafsul lawama, the reproaching soul. And that is responsible and that is representative of the psycho-emotional dimension that we have. So, and this corresponds to the needs of belonging. And the third dimension is an-nafsul ammara. And this represents the dimension of our instinctive or our primordial dimension. So basically the primordial needs that we have, such as safety and such as the need for physiological, the lowest level of the hierarchy of needs. So when it comes to an-nafsul lawama, when we're talking about mental health and mental illnesses, it is attached and it corresponds directly to the second dimension, which is an-nafsul lawama. And an-nafsul lawama represents our psycho-emotional needs. And this is the only dimension of our human persona that is sworn by in the Quran. In Surah Al-Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لا أقسم بيوم القيامة ولا أقسم بالنفس اللوامة. And in that way, God is swearing by an-nafsul lawama. And usually, if you're familiar with the language of the Quran, you would know that when God swears by something, it means that this thing is important. This thing is serious. So in a way, God is saying that your psycho-emotional needs are important. They have to be met. When you correspond this with the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you see that at the bottom, you have your physiological needs. The need for food, shelter, clothing, breathable air. This is the basic level when it comes to our motivations. That's the first thing that we need to secure as human beings. And there's a verse that corresponds with this in the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Adam when he created him and when he placed him in heaven, of course not being Jannatul Khuld, but the garden that he placed him in. He said to him, إِنَّ لَكَ أَن لَا تَجُوعَ فِيهَا وَلَا تَعْرَى وَأَنَّكَ لَا تَظْمَأُ فِيهَا وَلَا تَضْحَى. That in it you will find no need, no outside source, no outside need for food and water. You won't feel hunger because there's enough food for you. You won't feel thirst because there's enough for you to drink. You won't feel heat because there's enough shelter for you and there's enough clothing for you. This need was met. The second need that was met after that was the need for love and belonging. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him in that his partner, Hawa, Eve. So God is telling him that your needs are being met. So when God created the human being, He did not just create the human being and allowed him to go fend for himself. In the same way that every human being that is living now on earth, there are enough resources to provide for every single human being. But what's the challenge? Just today I was watching a report. It was an eye-opener. And it showed how the batteries in these devices are mostly made of cadmium. And cadmium is a rare resource. And there's only a few places in the world where it can be found. And one of those places is the Democratic Republic of Congo in the African continent. One of the wealthiest countries when it comes to resources, but one of the poorest countries when it comes to population. And the people that mine the cadmium for these batteries, there's no professional mining equipment. They have to mine with their bare hands. And sometimes a father has to take his children out of school so that all of them can mine together. And they were interviewing a father who said that the money that we get from mining this material is not even enough to feed my own children. It's not even enough for food. And what happens when we stand in line for the latest iPhone or the latest Galaxy and we don't get it? How upset we become. When on the other side, and they talk about first world problems, which are real. There are real first world problems. But that corresponds to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And sometimes you need to place yourself in a situation or in the shoes of people who don't even have the most basic needs, so that you appreciate the freedoms that you have in this country, so that you appreciate all of the blessings that you have. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Quran that He has ordained that everything is available for us. So going back to that question of emotional struggle, depression, sadness, anxiety. All of these things are real and they can be treated. You know, even if you study the life of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously not everything was happy-go-lucky. Not everything was on the up all the time. Had it been that way, the Prophet would not have designated an entire year that he referred to as Am al-Huzn, the year of sadness, the year of sorrow. And that's when he lost two of his most beloved people, two of his greatest defenders. One was his uncle, Abu Talib, who was a defender in him and a believer in him from day one, who provided for him security, who was a source of strength, a backbone for him. And number two was his dear and beloved and irreplaceable wife, Khadija bint Khuwaylid, a woman who gave everything that she owned, everything that she possessed to defend the Prophet. She was his spiritual and emotional backbone. And the year that he lost them, he referred to it as Am al-Huzn, the year of sorrow, the year of sadness. So sadness and sorrow was part of the life of Rasulullah. It was part of the life of the prophets. It was part of the life of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So this is one aspect. Another aspect is the aspect of self-worth and self-esteem. And perhaps one of the biggest struggles that we're dealing with today, in this day and age, in the world of, in the 21st century, in the world of connectivity, in the world of abundance that we live in, is a struggle with self-image, is a struggle with anxiety, is a struggle with depression. And there are many, many reasons for that. I'm not here to go into all of those details, but some of them are treatable. For instance, when you look at the habit of comparison, when we compare ourselves to other people, especially when we're online, on social media, the people that we follow, it's interesting because we follow certain personalities, say on, Facebook is for old people, right? So nobody's on Facebook anymore. Instagram. And you follow the people that all have small, different aspects that you want in your life. There's not one person that has everything, but a group of people. So you follow the person that, for instance, is always traveling and always posting pictures of themselves in exotic locations. And then you follow the person who is at home all the time, making miracles in the kitchen. And then you're following the person who is out and about on the grind, making a lot of money and driving fast cars. And these are all bits of pieces of a personality that we would like to construct for ourselves. But the reality is that you don't see the other side of what's going on. You don't see the depression. You don't see the anxiety. You don't see the worry. And you know what you don't see? The credit card statement and the debts. That's the biggest thing that you don't see. Because most of these people without a credit card, they would be barefoot, they would be naked, they would be uneducated, they would not have vehicles, and they would not have homes because everything is financed on debt. I want to share with you a narration from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He says the following. He says, مَا جَاعَ فَقِيرٌ إِلَّا بِمَا مُتَّعَ بِهِ غَنِي. On the other side of lavishness, I'm not saying being comfortable and wealthy, lavishness, overspending. On the other side of that, there is always a person that is paying the price through poverty. So the luxuries that we have, such as the smartphones, or the accessibility to the different types of food that we have in the gas station, the grocery store, the supermarket. I read a report one time. It said the amount of food that is produced in the world is enough to supply each and every living being on this earth, the more than 7 billion people, with 2,700 calories per day. More than enough. But where we have an abundance, on the other side of that is poverty for other people. There's always a different perspective. So comparison is one of those habits that causes anxiety, that may lead to depression, that may lead to other mental and emotional conditions and illnesses. Part of that also, and I'll mention this, is the language that we use as religious people. And I'll just cite a couple of examples. I won't take too long. But I'll give you an example from Christianity. See, the first language that Christian philosophy was solidified in was Latin. And the idea of self-regard, the first word that was chosen to translate the idea of self-regard was humilitas, which is the root of the English word humility. So when we talk about humility, among faithful people of the world, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim in different faith traditions, we look at humility as a virtue. And humility truly is a virtue. But if you trace the word humility back to its root, humilitas literally means to downgrade oneself, meaning to have a lower level of regard for oneself. And so one Christian writer, he says, the reason why so many religious people, they walk around with an inferiority complex is because they misunderstand concepts such as humility. They don't know what it means to be humble. They think that being humble and humility means that you act in a needy way, in a slavish way, and with an inferiority complex. And there are a number of examples within the Islamic faith. Now, please bear patience with me because there's an analysis to what I want to say. If you read some of the supplications which were taught to us by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, for instance, I'll give you one example. In the ta'qibat, which are the supplications and the du'as that are read after the 5 daily prayers. In ta'qib salatul asr, what do we read? وَأَسْأَلُهُ أَن يَتُوبَ عَلَيَّ تَوْبَةَ عَبْدٍ ذَلِيلٍ خَاضِعٍ فَقِيرٍ بَائِسٍ مِسْكِينٍ مُسْتَكِينٍ مُسْتَجِيرٍ. I ask God to confer upon me forgiveness, the forgiveness of one who is a slave, one who is servile, one who is submissive, one who is needy, one who is poor, and one who is asking for relief. It's the language of, when you just look at the language without context, it's the language of lowliness and the language of degradation. However, there's a secret to this. Why does it work? I'll give you another passage from another dua, and this is one of the most powerful supplications that we have, and it is dua Abu Hamza Thumali. He says the following: Sayyidi, ana as-saghiru alladhi rabbaytah, wa ana al-jahilu alladhi allamtah, wa ana al-wadhi'u alladhi rafa'tah. My Lord, I was the small one that you brought up, and I was the ignorant one that you gave knowledge and that you educated. And I was the lonely one, al-wadhi', I was the lonely one that you lifted, that you exalted. The key, and I mentioned this yesterday, is understanding the following: that when it comes to submission and surrenderance, what the Prophet taught us and what the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam taught us is that you are submissive and you surrender to nobody except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the most exalted status is when you submit to yourself, is when you submit yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you surrender everything that you have to Allah. And there are a number of narrations that remind us that the closest we are in proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most high, the most great, the most exalted, is when our forehead is placed on the ground in sujood. Physically, when we're at a very low level. And that's the secret to the equation. That if you want to be exalted, if you want to be raised, if you want your dreams to come true, if you want your goals to come true, then you surrender everything that you have to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Everything, my life, my death, my rituals, everything is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that was the secret that Imam Hussein alayhi salam taught us. In fact, it's so interesting because the Quran refers to the most exalted human being, which is the Prophet, as abd, as a slave. سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى. Amir al-Mu'mineen one day engages in a long hadith that I won't mention the whole thing, but he engages in an exchange with someone, and someone mistakes him for the Prophet. And he says to him, he describes who he is. He says, أنا عبد من عبيد محمد صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So there's no humility in being in submission and in surrenderance to the right principles, as long as they are to the right principles. And that's exactly what Imam Hussein alayhi salam taught us. He said to the enemy on the day of Ashura, he said, لا أعطيكم بيدي إعطاء الذليل ولا أفر منكم فرار العبيد. He says, I will not give my hand to you in subservience. I would rather give my neck than my hand. I would rather live as a free man on my feet, standing on my own 2 feet, than live as a slave in this life on my knees. I would rather die standing on my feet as a free man rather than live as a slave on my knees. Because he realized that he was a slave to nobody except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are a number of narrations which encourage this. One narration is the following. It says, Abdi ata'ni takun mathali. My servant, my slave, God is speaking. Ata'ni, obey me. Takun mathali. The continuation of the hadith says that in the same way that God says, kun fayakun, be and it becomes, you shall say be and it becomes. And it's radically, this concept is radically different than what you learn on TV and through Hollywood and through the media. You learn that you go out and get yours, and that the world is your oyster, and that the world is yours if you learn to be a rebel. When in fact, the world becomes your oyster, and the world becomes yours once you learn to become submissive, but submissive not to this world, submissive to the creator of this world. When you surrender to the creator of this world, not when you surrender to the world. And most people, they are surrendering to the world rather than surrendering to the creator of the world. This is one of our biggest challenges. And then we ask ourselves, why are we so confused? Why are we so unhappy? Why do we experience anxiety and sadness and sorrow and depression and upset on a daily basis? It's because most people don't have a correct understanding, a proper understanding of principles. So in closing, I'll say that the Prophet and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they understood this concept very well. That anything can go their way, and they were not in need of anyone once they submitted themselves and they surrendered themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are a number of stories, and I won't go through any of these stories. I just want to leave you with a lesson that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam teaches us. And it's a saying of Rasulullah. And sometimes the sorrowful things that happen in our life, the sad things that happen in our life, we don't have control over. We don't have control over whether a relative who is sick is going to live or die. We don't have control over that. We have taslim, and yesterday I mentioned the concept of taslim and how a true believer, because he or she has a clear vision of what's on the other side of that hurt and sorrow and pain, finds themselves in a state of submission and taslim. Because they have a clear vision. And once suffering has meaning and purpose behind it, it ceases to be suffering. And Rasulullah teaches us a very valuable lesson. He says in his hadith, إِنَّ الْعَيْنَ لَتَدْمَعْ, that our eyes may tear, وَالْقَلْبَ لَيَحْزَنْ, and our hearts may break. However, in the translation of that hadith, he says, we never say anything that violates the command of our Lord. Meaning that even though things are not going your way in your heart, or even though things may happen that cause you to weep and be sorrowful, and those are two things that you can't control sometimes, what you can always control, always have control over, is your tongue, the words that you speak. Do you speak in a positive way or do you speak in a negative way? You're always in control. And so there's a lot of greatness, brothers and sisters, that's waiting on the other side of our struggles. In the same way that the Quran tells us that the Prophet Musa hit rock bottom, and that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam found himself in a state of loneliness, psychologically and emotionally was hurting, but they realized that at the end of that, there was much joy. And now I want to take your hearts to the journey of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, because on a day like this, which was the 2nd of Muharram, after a journey that lasted around 23 days, Imam Hussein arrived in the land of Karbala. And the distance between Mecca and Karbala was roughly 1,500 kilometers, give or take. And there were about 14 stops that were on the way. And in each one of those stops, history narrates that something significant happened. So in one of those stops, the Imam met Farazdaq, the poet, who informed him that the people are with you, their hearts are with you, but their swords are against you. In one of those stops, he met Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, a man who had no interest in joining the caravan of Imam Hussein, but had a change of heart. In one of those stops, he met Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, whom we will mention tomorrow, the commander of the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, the brave man who had a change of heart on the day of Ashura. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when he finds that his path is blocked to Kufa, he turns to his companions. He tells his companions, which one of you knows the pathways? Which one of you is familiar with these roads so that he can deliver us to safety? One of his companions, by the name of At-Tarimmah, he was a cameleer, meaning that he led a fleet of camels, and caravans during those days obviously were, especially caravans in the desert, were comprised of camels, because camels can travel for long distances in that type of climate, in that type of terrain. At-Tarimmah says, me, Ya Aba Abdullah, I'm the one, I'm familiar with these roads, I'm familiar with these paths, I can take you to safety. And history narrates a number of verses of poetry that At-Tarimmah began to chant to the camels, to have them rise and move in the direction of safety. يا ناقتي لا تذعري من زجري وامشي بنا قبل طلوع الفجر بخير ركبان وخير سفر آل رسول الله آل الفخر. He says to the camels, he says, Do you know what kind of cargo you are taking with you? Do you know how precious this cargo is? This is Ali Rasulullah. This is the family of Rasulullah. This is the family of pride. Until finally on the second day, Imam Hussein arrives in the land of Karbala. And Karbala had a number of inhabitants. The tribe of Banu Asad were the inhabitants of Karbala. And the camels stopped. They did not continue. Imam Hussein knew intuitively that he had arrived in the place that was destined for him and his family. He knew of the name Karbala because he had been informed since many years before. So he began to turn to the people. He began to ask left and right, what is the name of this land? Some of them said it is known as Al-Ghadriyat, which was one of the names of Karbala. Does it go by any other name? Yes. Nainawa is one of its names. Does it go by any other name? Until finally they said it is known as Karbun wa Bala, the land of sorrow, the land of misery. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam heard those words, he turned to his companions, Ashabi. He said, my companions, this is where we are going to settle. This is where our caravan is going to settle. This is where we will pitch our tents. This is the place that we will meet our final destination. This is the place where our men shall be executed. This is the place where our women and children shall be taken captive. This is the place where the camps shall be set on fire. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Wa saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun. والعاقبة للمتقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات.